Welcome to Island Crimes and Mysteries. And now, it's time to join your host Nules for another episode.
Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Ireland Crimes and Mysteries. I want to thank you for joining me today, and if you're a returning listener, I want to say a big thank you for your continued support. If this is your first time listening to my podcast, welcome. It's great to have you on board. So without further ado, let's get started on today's story. Today's case takes us to the town of Clonmel in County Tipperary, where a tragedy unfolded that shook the nation to its very core. It's the story of Deirdre Crowley, a little girl whose life was cut short in the most unimaginable way. But before we get to the darkness, let's start with the light. Who was Deirdre? Who her parents were? And how their lives intertwined before everything fell apart. I'm your host Nules, and this is Ireland Crimes and Mysteries, the story of Deirdre Crowley. Deirdre Crowley was born in 1995 in County Cork, Ireland. She was the daughter of Chris Crowley and Christine O'Sullivan, who had met in 1994 and were living together in Glounthaune, a village just outside Cork City. For the first few years of her life, Deirdre lived with her parents in Glounthaune. In December 1998, when she was 3 years old, her parents separated, and Christine moved to Douglas, a suburb of Cork, taking Deirdre with her. Despite the separation, Chris maintained visitation rights, and for a while, things seemed to be going as well as could be expected. One notable event from that time was Deirdre's 4th birthday in 1999, where Chris and Christine came together to celebrate Deirdre's birthday at McDonald's with a few of her little friends. This was a moment of normalcy in what soon would become a nightmare. Deirdre's mother, Christine O'Sullivan, was born in or around 1962, as she was 39 at the time of the tragic events we will talk about soon. She grew up in Cork and had strong family ties to the area, particularly Ballydesmond. By the time she met Chris in 1994, she was working as a computer technician at the Cork Institute of Technology, or CIT, a job that required both technical skill and patience. Christine and Chris shared interests in camping, hiking and drawing, which likely would have been what brought them together. For Christine, her job at CIT was more than just a career. It was a way to support herself and Deirdre after the separation. As a computer technician, she was at the forefront of technology in the late 1990s, a time when computers were becoming increasingly important in education and business. Her role required her to be knowledgeable about hardware and software, troubleshooting issues for students and staff alike. Chris Crowley, on the other hand, was born in or around 1957, as he was 44 at the time of the tragedy in 2001. He was a teacher of maths and French at Loreto Convent in Fermoy, a position he held until his actions in 1999. Colleagues and students remembered him as a good teacher, with no apparent signs of the darkness that would later emerge. He would commute from Cork to Fermoy every day, but he made it work. Chris had been married before to a woman named Ursula, though details of that marriage are sparse. His relationship with Christine began in 1994, and as I said, they lived together until their separation in 1998. It's worth noting that while they lived together and had a child, there is no record of Chris and Christine ever being legally married. When Chris and Christine finally separated in December of 1998, it was, of course, a significant change for Deirdre. At just 3 years old, she moved from the only home she had known in Glounthaune to a new house in Douglas with her mother. Douglas is a bustling suburb, quite different from the quieter village of Glounthaune, so it must have been an adjustment for her. Despite the separation, Chris did remain a part of Deirdre's life through visitation rights, which were agreed upon amicably, or so it seemed. That celebration of Deirdre's 4th birthday in McDonald's in 1999 was really particularly poignant, I suppose, because it did show that despite their separation, Chris and Christine were still able to come together for their daughter's sake. But this separation, as I said, did reshape the whole family, and it created 2 homes for Deirdre. Christine, of course, having custody and Chris having those visitation rights. This arrangement allowed him to see her regularly, though exact details like how often and for how many days aren't specified in any records. What's clear is that they aimed to keep Deirdre connected to both parents, despite the fact that they were living apart. Christine took on the primary caregiving role, balancing both her job at CIT with raising Deirdre, while Chris maintained his teaching career and used his visitation time to stay involved. And for nearly a year, this setup seemed to be working. There seemed to be a shared commitment to co-parenting Deirdre. One example of this cooperation came during the Christmas of 1999. They agreed Deirdre would spend Christmas Day with her mother in Douglas, while Chris would have her on Christmas Eve and St. Stephen's Day in Glantown. This plan obviously ensured Deirdre enjoyed the season with both of her parents. It was a small detail, but it painted a picture that the two of them were navigating this separation practically and with some care. From late 1998 into 1999, their lives seemed to settle into distinct routines. In Douglas, Christine maintained a busy schedule, working at CIT and caring for Deirdre in a suburb alive with activity. Meanwhile, Chris taught at Loreto Convent, where colleagues and students saw him as a capable educator. His visits with Deirdre bridged the gap between their homes, keeping their bond alive. There is no hint in the public records of disputes over these arrangements during this time. The new normal appeared to be working well. They were making an effort to prioritise Deirdre. Christine's move to Douglas gave her and Deirdre a fresh start, while Chris's visitation rights ensured that he didn't feel left behind and saw Deirdre. Everyone thought they had figured out how to share custody of their little girl, even after their paths had diverged. Up until late 1999, everything suggests this balance was a steady one. As I said, on the surface, they were making it work for Deirdre's sake, but Chris was unravelling quietly. He'd recently reconnected with a girl named Regina Nelligan, a former student he dated years earlier. Chris and Regina first encountered each other when Regina was a 16-year-old student at Loreto Convent in Fermoy. Their relationship began during a school trip to Paris, initiating an affair that was very inappropriate due to Regina's age and Chris's position of authority. This marked the start of a connection that would have significant consequences. The affair between Chris and Regina continued throughout her time at school, lasting until after she completed her leaving certificate. It eventually came to an acrimonious end during a holiday in Italy, after which they lost contact for approximately 10 years. In July 1999, Chris and Regina reconnected in a supermarket car park in Portlaoise, County Laois, after that decade apart. During this meeting, Chris manipulated Regina by convincing her that he needed to protect his daughter, Deirdre, from her mother, Christine. He falsely claimed Christine was unfit to care for Deirdre due to postnatal depression, a claim unsupported by evidence. This manipulation rekindled their association and drew Regina into Chris's plans. On Friday, the 3rd of December 1999, Chris arrived at Christine's house in Douglas to pick up Deirdre. It was a standard visitation day, one of dozens since their separation. Christine handed over her little girl, 4 years of age, trusting her dad completely, expecting her to be dropped back after she'd spent time with her dad. For Christine, it was business as usual. She'd never had a reason to question Chris before, but Chris had no intention of bringing Deirdre back that day or the following day. After leaving Douglas, he drove southeast towards County Wexford, a journey of over 2 hours. Some accounts suggest Gardaí traced a possible detour to Wales via ferry from Rosslare before returning the following day. However, I couldn't find any accurate account of this, so it remains just that, a possibility, not a confirmed fact. Back in Douglas on the 4th of December, Christine was starting to feel uneasy. When Deirdre didn't return as expected, she tried calling Chris, but to no response. Panic was setting in, and that evening she contacted the Gardaí to report her daughter missing. The search kicked off, but Chris and Deirdre were already gone, moving towards the next step with Regina Nelligan waiting in the wings. Chris had ditched his red Nissan car in the Talbot Hotel car park in Wexford, where Regina collected him. The discovery of the car led many to believe that Mr. Crowley had taken his daughter to either France or Britain to the Rosslare Europort. Ditching the car there was a calculated move to throw off any immediate pursuit. After Christine had contacted the Gardaí to report her daughter missing, a search kicked off, but Chris and Deirdre were well gone. In the run-up to Deirdre's abduction, Regina made significant contributions to ensuring everything went to plan. By November of that year, Regina was already deep into it. Chris had her hooked on his story about needing to protect Deirdre from Christine, and she was all in. So in November 1999, she rented a house called Crone Lodge, an isolated cottage near Clonmel in County Tipperary. It wasn't some cosy getaway, it was a hideout, a place Chris could disappear to with Deirdre. Regina was the one that set it up, getting it ready for what was to come. Then we fast forward to the 4th of December, just a day after Chris had taken Deirdre from Christine's place in Douglas. Regina, as I said, was waiting for him at the Talbot Hotel car park in Wexford, where she collected Chris and Deirdre. Regina then drove them straight to Crone Lodge in Clonmel, their new secret little hiding spot. And from then on, Regina is their lifeline. Chris has her trained in this whole subterfuge kind of game. He tells her what to do, how to keep it quiet. She starts making regular trips, bringing groceries, money, whatever they need to stay hidden. It's not just a one-off. She's committed, going back and forth, keeping them going. But where are they getting the money, you might ask, to stay hidden? Well, Chris had cashed in an insurance policy worth £17,000, which was a pretty substantial chunk of money back then. And he'd also taken out a £10,000 loan from Woodchester. So he had a lot of cash on hand. And it kind of shows he probably was planning this for a while. The house in Glanthorne was also apparently put on the market. So it wasn't some rash decision. He was tying up loose ends, you could say, making sure he had the funds to pull this off. Now, Regina's role didn't just stop at groceries. She was the go-between for money too. One of her tasks was to get cash allegedly from Chris's mother. She would later admit that she'd gone to his mother and his sister to allegedly collect this money. Chris needed that steady flow to keep them afloat in Clonmel. He also had her making phone calls. 2 specific ones stand out. He told her to ring a friend and a colleague of his, probably to keep up appearances, and another call to the caretaker of the Loreto Convent in Fermoy. That was an interesting one, as the caretaker of the school also owned a shotgun, and Chris would later steal this same shotgun, and that would come into play down the line. That theft happened in March of 2000. Chris had seemingly broken into the house in Fermoy and took the shotgun. The sources that I've read don't detail his exact method, whether he drove himself, borrowed a vehicle or got a lift, but these sources imply he left Clonmel, committed the theft and returned undetected. The Fermoy Gardaí got the report of the theft, but unfortunately they didn't connect it to Chris Crowley, who'd gone missing with his daughter 3 months earlier at this stage. It's a pity they didn't, because if you look into it, he had worked at the Loreto Convent, the same as the caretaker, but no link was made between them. 2 separate dots, the missing man and the stolen gun, but they didn't join up the dots. It's one of those details that makes you wonder what might have been different if they had. But as I said, the Gardaí did spring into action immediately after Christine had rang them and told them that Deirdre was missing. They immediately classified it as an abduction case and launched a search, suspecting Chris as the perpetrator due to his failure to return his 4-year-old daughter to her mother. The Gardaí immediately targeted places tied to Chris, starting with his home in Glanthorne in County Cork, about 10 miles from Douglas, where Christine lived. They searched the house, looking for any signs of Chris or Deirdre, clothes, travel plans, anything that might hint at where they'd gone. They also checked other spots linked to him, his workplace at Loreto Convent in Fermoy, though it's unclear if they physically searched the school for clues. Alongside the location checks, the Gardaí reached out to Chris's known associates, his family, his friends, his colleagues, anyone who might have known his plans. These early efforts were broad, targeting those close to him to see if he'd confided in anyone. It was unclear if any tangible information was gathered. Some aspects of the Garda investigation into Chris and Deirdre Crowley's disappearance remain vague in the public record, so it's hard to tell if they got any tangible leads. As I said, they'd located the abandoned car in County Wexford, 120 miles from Cork, and this of course was hinting that he'd fled southeast. This led them to check Rosslaire's ferry records, suspecting a possible trip abroad, though no firm lead emerged there. At this stage, Regina Nelligan wasn't on their radar. The Gardaí were focused on Chris, his financial moves, like cashing in the £17,000 insurance policy and taking out the loan from Woodchester. They interviewed bank staff and checked property records. Christine began with public appeals, starting with an RTE broadcast on the 23rd of December. She was trying to keep the pressure on, but the trail stayed cold. The Gardaí didn't yet know who might be helping him, and Clonmel wasn't even in the picture. The first concrete link to Regina Nelligan came in April of 2000, about 4 months into the search. Gardaí had been tracing Chris's past associates, as I said, family, friends, colleagues, since December, and Regina resurfaced as a person of interest, and they prepared to interview her. Meanwhile, the Christmas and the New Year of 2000 came and went, and the holiday cheer felt hollow for Christine. Her daughter had been gone almost 4 weeks now, and every day was a battle for Christine to keep going. But she wasn't giving up. Christine went on the Late Late Show, one of Ireland's biggest stages at the time, to talk about Deirdre. With a steady voice, she told the country about her little girl, her blonde hair, her blue eyes and a smile that could melt you, and begged anyone watching to help. It was raw, it was real, and it was going out live to homes all over Ireland. She was hoping someone, somewhere, who was watching had seen something. Of course, the Gardaí had no idea that Chris was actually indeed in Clonmel, holed up in Crone Lodge with Deirdre, the place that Regina Nelligan had rented for them back in November. All they have at the moment is the car that they found and Chris's cash trail, the 27,000 in total that he had taken before he vanished, but it wasn't pointing anywhere solid yet. By May of 2000, Christine is on her way to Wales. She's convinced that's where Chris might be gone with Deirdre. So she went to Wales because the Gardaí had found Chris's car abandoned in Wexford, near Rosslare. She goes on various TV and radio stations, pouring her soul out to anyone who listened to her. Please, if you've seen my little girl, call in, she says, her voice raw with 8 months of grief. She's picturing Deirdre's blonde hair, her bright eyes, wondering if she's out there somewhere just beyond reach. It is a long shot, but she's not the type to sit still. She's going to fight with everything she's got to get her daughter back. Now, back in Cork, the Gardaí are starting to focus on Regina Nelligan's phone records, because when they talked to her back in April, and they'd found press cuttings on the case in her flat in Dublin, but she'd sworn to them at the time that she hadn't seen him in years. So now they're looking into her mobile, and that's when they see something odd. They see calls coming in from a phone box in Clonmel to her mobile. So they start to dig a little deeper, and they find she's been also dialing estate agents around Clonmel too. They can't understand why. What's the connection with Clonmel for her? Then they also see that one of Chris's friends in Cork has been ringing a phone box near Regina's place in Rialto in Dublin. So it's like this secret little network is lighting up in front of them, and the Gardaí start to wonder, what else is Regina hiding? By August of 2000, it's Deirdre's 5th birthday, and Christine sits down with a Cork reporter for The Sun. She says, I keep thinking about her birthday, wondering what she's doing, if she's got any presents, how she's holding up. I look at her tiny shoes under the bed. They wouldn't fit her anymore. She was 3'6" when he took her. She's probably grown an inch or two by now. Her dresses are just hanging there, too small. If I'd known last December this would stretch 8 months, I'd have fallen apart. I don't even know how I'm still standing. Every morning, every night, I pray she's safe, that she's okay. Back in Cork, the Gardaí are preparing to talk to Regina again. Those clippings that they found did raise eyebrows, but they needed more. And they had a little bit more in those phone call records that they had found. So they bring her in again, right around Deirdre's birthday. She's cooperative. She sits down with them, tears streaming as she opens up. Yeah, I had a thing with Chris. He was my maths teacher back in the day. We were close, but that was ages ago, at least 10 years. She points to the press cuttings they've found. I kept those because I knew him, that's all. No big deal. She's emotional, but she's holding firm. No clue where he is, she says. So they had to let her go. But I think at this stage, the Gardaí aren't really buying it. Well, not fully anyway. And 2 months later, they're back on her doorstep. This time, Regina, she's got an edge to her. She's a lot more defiant. What do you think I am? If I knew where that little girl was, I'd tell you. Don't you think I want her to be safe? She snaps. She's digging her heels in and she's pushing back hard. And the Gardaí, again, leave empty-handed. She immediately sends a coded message to Chris that the Gardaí are not giving up. For Christine, those 8 months have been absolute torture. But she's not just sitting around doing nothing. She continues with her media appeals and hoping against hope that somebody listening will be able to tell her something. The Gardaí are still piecing things together. They've got those Clonmel calls, they've got Regina's estate agent chats, the phone box near her flat. It's starting to paint a little picture. But they're not quite there yet, not close enough to pin it down. Christine's words to the reporter from The Sun linger on. I don't know how I've coped. She's hanging on every thread, praying every night, while 60 miles away. Deirdre's in that cottage, hidden away by a man that she trusts implicitly, and a woman who's lying to keep him safe. By December of 2000, Regina is really on edge. She's been Chris's lifeline for a year now, ever since he snatched Deirdre and vanished. She's got her car loaded up, stuffed to the brim with toys, food, all the supplies she brings every 6 weeks to that hidden cottage near Clonmel. But this isn't just a quick drop-off for Regina. It's her chance to see him, to spend a few precious hours with the man she's been hooked on since she was a teenager. She's got Christmas presents for Deirdre, exactly what Chris asked her for, wrapped up neat and tidy by her own hands. She's careful though, she has to be. As we know, the Gardaí are onto her and she knows it. She can't afford to be spotted. Not now, when things are getting too risky. That day she pulled up to Crone Lodge. Before she even got out of the car, she knew things were different. Chris seemed on edge. And he tells her, you can't come back anymore. The Gardaí are onto you. This is a gut punch for Regina. I mean, she's been his secret keeper and now he's cutting her off. It's too hot, he said. No more visits. No more trips to the house. Regina is devastated. Chris promises to reach out to her when it's safer. I'll call you when I need you, he tells her. I mean, it sounds like she'd literally do anything for him. It almost sounds like Stockholm Syndrome for old world. In contrast, throughout that year, Christine had been making regular visits to the UK. She was following up any lead that came in to investigators in Cork. She went to London, she went to Birmingham, she went to Manchester. She was putting up posters everywhere of Deirdre. Every time there was a possible sighting, she hopped on a plane and packed a bag with photos of her family to show Deirdre how things had changed and new clothes that would fit her growing little girl. But every time she had to face the long journey back to Cork alone. She set up an internet site that featured pictures of her daughter and a detailed description of her. She appeared on countless television shows in Britain and in newspapers there too. She even hired a private detective, spending every penny of her savings to try and come up with new leads. She made contact with groups campaigning for missing and abducted children, with Irish groups in Europe, the US, Canada, and even as far as Australia, and sent them links to the website and posters of her little girl's face. By the first anniversary of her daughter's disappearance, Christine was struggling to cope, but still found the strength to continue her campaign to get her daughter back. She went on Pat Kenny's radio show and gave a rare insight into the fear she had about Chris Crowley's mental disorder. We're praying for a lucky break. All we can do is pray for a miracle. I think that's all that's going to bring her back. There has to be somebody who knows something. I know Chris Crowley is a very convincing person and he might have persuaded them to believe his stories. But I would plead with them to consider Deirdre. She's just a little girl. She does not deserve to have this done to her. It's gone on far too long. I think Chris sees himself as Deirdre's owner. But they weren't the only words that showed Christine O'Sullivan's maternal intuition was strong and that she could foresee the dangers that lay ahead for Deirdre. At the time, she said other things that would prove to be worryingly close to the reality of what was happening in another corner of Ireland, just 60 miles away. In one interview, she surmised that because Chris was a fugitive, he was living like a hermit. Chris will not go out and meet people, and obviously neither will Deirdre. As the second Christmas approached, she continued to do anything she could to aid the hunt for Deirdre. She began making a programme with RTE for their Would You Believe series. She liaised with the UK and Canadian investigators to try to get her daughter's image onto the back of milk cartons. And as she lay down to sleep at night, she wondered if she would ever see her daughter again. At the end of July 2001, RTE aired the Would You Believe programme, focusing on Christine's fate and how it had got her through the dreadful months since Deirdre was snatched. She was a religious woman and had joined the Baptist church in Cork many years before and regularly attended services there. Days later, one of the officers heading up the investigation, Sergeant Brian Fitzgerald of Douglas Garda Station, issued a stern warning against complacency in the abduction of Deirdre. He said that the public were regarding the disappearance as a domestic situation rather than as the criminal act it was. If a 4-year-old girl was taken by a stranger, the whole country would be up in arms. But because it was her father, people don't seem to be as concerned. Look, he said, Chris taught maths at the Loretta Convent in Fermoy for years. Maybe 16,000 kids passed through his classes. One of you might have seen him out there somewhere. Please come forward. It sounds like a simple plea to us listening, but behind the scenes, the Gardaí are zeroing in on Regina Nelligan. They're convinced she's hiding more than she let on when they grilled her about her ex Chris. They'd been onto her since April of 2000, found those newspaper clippings in her Dublin flat, and they didn't buy her "I just knew him" excuse. Now they're connecting the dots, finally. Phone calls from a Clonmel phone box to Christine, Regina ringing estate agents in Tipperary before Chris vanished. The hunt's shifting to Clonmel and they're not letting Regina off the hook this time. It's the 30th of August 2001 and at Crone Lodge, the rundown cottage just outside Clonmel, inside Deirdre's playing with her dolls. She's in ragged clothes, her little world shrunk to those 4 walls that she's within. Chris is pacing when he hears a car pull up. 2 Gardaí step out. He freezes, he looks at Deirdre, probably tells her to be quiet. The place is like a ghost town. Nobody is around. The last person that was there was Regina back in December with those Christmas gifts. He told her to wrap for Deirdre, but he cut her off after that. Too dangerous, he said. She warned him. The Gardaí were asking about Clonmel. The 2 Gardaí approach the door and give a loud knock. He knows he can't dodge it. They'll circle around to the back if he doesn't answer. So he cracks open the door just enough. They're casual at first. "Hey, any trouble with builders around here?" one of them says. "What's your name? Who's here with you?" Chris answers back, "I'm Alan Kay. I live here alone." And he slams the door. This is it. Game over. Now, this is where things take a turn for the worst. He ran back inside and he grabbed that shotgun that he'd stole in Fermoy back in March of 2000. He had kept it loaded and ready just in case this day would ever come. He'd promised himself 2 years ago Christine would never see Deirdre again, and he was sticking to it. "Deirdre," he calls her name. She comes out to the kitchen. He looks at her and he raises the gun. Outside, the Gardaí hear it. 2 blasts, one right after the other. Muffled, but they knew what they were. They pound on the door and try to open it, but it won't budge. Around the back, they smashed a window to climb in. And what they found, I'm sure, will stay with them forever. 60 miles away in Cork, Christine is, needless to say, on edge. The Gardaí had called her that morning to say they had a lead and they might know where Chris is, and they're heading to a house in Tipperary. And if it pans out, Deirdre could be home with her tonight. She tries to keep busy, pacing around. She even talks to the sergeant who's been her rock since it started, really. She has hope for the first time in ages. Then Superintendent Brian Calnan shows up at her door and all those hopes come crashing down. Deirdre's gone. Chris killed her. That night, and I don't know how she did it, but Christine, she bravely spoke to Anne Mooney from the Irish Daily Mirror. "I can't believe her daddy did this. I thought they were abroad. Never figured they were still here. It's not real yet. I keep thinking I'll see her again. We were so close. I was supposed to hold her tonight. Tell her how much I missed her and how hard I'd fought for her. Everyone's breaking down around me. But it's like this happened to someone else, not me, not my baby." Christine is numb. She's caught between disbelief and pain, and that pain hasn't even fully hit yet. She's only coming to, I suppose, the realisation that 60 miles away, her daughter was right there all along in Clonmel, not in Wales. and not in England. Chris had shot Deirdre, then himself, as the officers closed in, and the fallout was immediate. Deputy John McGuinness didn't hold back, and he's calling for a full Garda inquiry into how this was handled, saying, "I'm really worried a man as disturbed as Chris could have been approached like that." He's questioning everything. How much psychological profiling had they used? How well they understood Chris's mindset? That moment knocking on the door at the last second might have been the wrong call, he said. Chris was already scared, already on edge. We need to get what was going on in his head. It's a heavy critique, and he's not alone. Alan Shatter TD and Mary Bonotti MEP are also demanding answers. Alan Shatter wants to know when the Gardaí got the tip about Chris being in that house and what kind of plan they had for approaching him. The Gardaí are feeling the heat. Everyone's asking how they let this happen. So they set up a press conference in Clonmel to explain, but it was scrapped at the last minute, and instead they put out a formal statement. An Garda Síochána has a duty to thoroughly investigate deaths like this. The Commissioner has appointed a senior officer to look into every detail. Once it's done, we'll send the file to the coroner for an inquest. That's it. No real answers about what went on at the door. No explanation of their tactics. It doesn't feel enough for the people who want to know why this ended so badly. At Crone Lodge, the scene's locked down tight. Gardaí have it sealed off, and technical experts combed through every inch. The state pathologist, Dr. John Harbison, arrived to examine both Chris and Deirdre. It's grim work, really, when you think about it, but we'll get to his findings in a while. Journalists are swarming around, talking to locals, trying to figure out how Chris stayed under the radar for 20 months. Nobody saw a little girl, not once. Some people said they noticed a man, but they didn't even know the place was rented. Chris played it smart. He grew a beard, wore a baseball cap, kept his head down. He had everything delivered, even the milk. The local milkman told reporters he'd been paid £40 up front for 3 months of drops and never saw a little girl. He just dealt with the man. It's eerie, really, when you think about it. Chris kept Deirdre completely hidden, like she didn't exist. The Gardaí conducted door-to-door inquiries asking questions, and it's clear Chris barely left the house. When he did, as I said, he was in that disguise, and he'd be in and out as fast as he could. The whole country was asking, how did he pull this off so close to Cork without anyone noticing? Regina Nelligan's name then starts to pop up in the papers. The one who rented the house for him back in November of 1999, brought him his supplies, kept his secret. But how deep in it was she? That wasn't clear yet. It would take years for the full story to come out in court. Ballistic experts got to work on the shotgun, and it soon became clear that it was the same shotgun that had been taken from the house in Fermoy. As I said, that theft didn't raise any red flags then, but now it's a grim piece of the puzzle. Deirdre was buried beside her granddad Eugene at Kiskeen Cemetery near Ballydesmond on the 2nd of September 2001. Over 1,000 people attended at St. Patrick's Church for the funeral service. Christine placed Deirdre's favourite things on top of her little white coffin. A pair of shiny black patent leather shoes, her beloved Barbie doll, a photo of her smiling, and a candle flickering softly. Christine was surrounded by her sisters as she faced this unimaginable grief. The service was led by Father Seamus Keneally, the parish priest, with Father Michael O'Regan from the Cork Institute of Technology and Pastor Terry Price from Christine's Baptist Church joining in. Christine spoke to the congregation that had gathered to say goodbye to Deirdre and support her. Tears streaming down her face, but her voice holding steady, she said, "I prayed Deirdre would come home safe. I prayed for her happiness. I trust in God. He knows where she is now. He brought her home, not to me, but to him. I'm not giving up hope I'll see her again." Pastor Price also spoke, saying he'd been honoured to be near Christine and her family, hearing their stories of Deirdre's bright eyes. Her life was short, but God's got her now, he said, offering what comfort he could. Father O'Regan read a message from Chris's family. They didn't come, but they sent their words. We're heartbroken over Deirdre's loss and send our deepest condolences to Christine and her family. She and Deirdre will always be in our hearts and prayers. Christine and her sisters carried Deirdre's little coffin out of the church, placing it in the hearse for the short drive to Kiskeam Cemetery, where she was laid to rest beside her grandfather. The next day, Chris was buried elsewhere in Cork, forever apart from the little girl he thought he owned. That morning, Niall Prendeville was on the radio in Cork, hosting a chat about the case. Dr. Colm O'Connor, a clinical psychologist, was speaking, saying cases like Chris's often point to a violent or abusive family history. When Chris's sister-in-law hears what he is saying and calls into the station to defend the Crowley family, saying, "The Crowley family's happy and dignified. His dad was the gentlest man I knew. It's awful to say this on the day he's buried. There's more to this story. It'll come out in time, but not now. We've kept our dignity and we won't let his name be dragged like this. What he did out of love, nothing else." It was a raw outburst. Love, she described it as. But the Gardaí who saw that scene at Crone Lodge, they'd never call it that. The investigation continued, a very grim task for all those involved. Deirdre had been found still in the clothes she had been taken in that very first day. Her shoes had been cut open at the toes to fit her growing feet. The house was a mess, damp and dark. Even the bedclothes were covered in mildew. There was no sign that she'd ever been outside in those 20 months. She was a prisoner in there. Chief Superintendent Martin Callanan, head of the National Bureau of Criminal Investigation, was appointed to lead the internal probe. He was known as one of the best, but the pressure was on him to get answers. Meanwhile, the investigation continued on, prepping a case for the coroner's court. The staff at the Loreto Convent were all questioned. Regina Nelligan was questioned 3 times in Dublin, Clonmel and Cork, and she went willingly each time. I'll talk about what she said shortly. Gardaí were also looking into who else might have helped Chris. Regina's name obviously was out there now, and the media were circling around. She had rented Crone Lodge for him, brought him the supplies, kept his secret, but just how much she did, that's still unfolding at this stage. Their relationship, as I said, had started in 1985 when she was only 16 and a student at the Loreto Convent in Fermoy. She'd been excited for a school trip to Paris, but she almost didn't make it until her maths teacher, Chris Crowley, stepped in and found her a spot at the last minute. On that trip, on the bus, he sat right beside her, and it began from there, their affair. Back in Ireland, they kept it going, but they had to be sneaky about it. Regina was the daughter of a well-known undertaker and businessman in Fermoy, and Chris was this respected teacher, liked by everyone, his colleagues, the parents, the whole school community. They'd meet at his house while his wife Ursula was out, passing it off as extra maths lessons. Regina told psychiatrists years later that Chris had made her feel special, like she could do anything. He promised her the world, said he'd leave Ursula and move to Dublin with her once she'd finished her leaving cert. 2 years later, in 1987, when she was 18 and getting ready to head to the National College of Art and Design in Dublin, they took a trip to Italy together. She couldn't wait to be away with him, but it turned out to be a disaster. Chris was cold and distant, nothing like the men she thought she knew. But it was only when they got back, he dropped the bomb. He said he wasn't leaving his wife, nor was he giving up his career, nor was he going away with her. It was over. She was crushed. She even thought about ending her own life. At one point, she was so desperate that she showed up at his door in Cork. Ursula was there and invited her in for tea, not knowing anything about what was really going on. Chris drove her back to Dublin. On the way, she told him she was going to end her own life, and he took it seriously, this threat, and spent every weekend for a year in Dublin keeping an eye on her. I don't know how he got away with that or what he said to his wife. But he was still cold and distant to her, and eventually it just got too much for Regina. The fact he didn't want a relationship anymore, but he was there every weekend, was only making her suffer, so he agreed to stop coming. In his absence, she built him up in her mind. He became this hero figure, this perfect man she can't let go of. It's like he's taken over her whole world. She dropped out of college and she started drifting, taking low-paying jobs, moving from one dingy flat to another. For years she was just floating around, lost, until that summer of 1999, when Chris came back into her life. He wrote her a letter out of the blue, and she wrote back to him and she gave him her mobile number and he called her. That's when they agreed to meet, and he laid out his story about his 4-year-old daughter Deirdre. He told her how she'd been mentally and physically abused by her mother, Christine O'Sullivan. That Christine was trying to pull her into some religious sect. He claimed he'd always been Deirdre's main carer, but had no shot at custody. So he needed Regina's help to save her. Of course, it was all lies, but Regina swallowed it up. She was still so wrapped up in him, she believed anything he would say. In the weeks after that meeting, Regina was fully committed. She made trips to Clonmel. She looked at a few houses, picked one with no windows facing the main road, perfect for staying hidden. And in November 1999, she signed the lease on Crone Lodge, spinning a story to the landlord about her partner, Alan Kay. It was all part of the plan. And on December 3rd, 1999, she bought a mobile phone and she headed to Waterford, waiting for Chris's instructions. The next evening, he called, telling her to meet him at the Talbot Hotel car park in Wexford. When she got there, he had Deirdre with him. He abandoned the car, introduced Deirdre to his friend Bunny, that's what he called Regina, and they drove to Clonmel. At the house in Clonmel, he handed her the money and he told her to call his mother and his sister, allegedly, to let them know it all went smoothly. 4 days later, he gave her 2 phone numbers, friends of his who worked at the Loretto convent, and for her to pass on coded messages to keep them allegedly in the loop too. Every 6 weeks after that, Regina went back to Clonmel with the supplies. She'd be careful. She'd switch up which shops she would buy stuff in, so nobody would cotton on. She even saw Christine on the Late Late Show pleading for Deirdre's return, and that did shake her a bit. And she asked Chris about it, but he said that Christine was faking her love, that it was all an act, and she believed him. She was too far gone to see the truth. When she told him that the Gardaí were closing in, he, again, cut contact, and they didn't speak for 8 months, until the end, when it was too late. Now we fast forward to January of 2003, and Regina's in court facing charges for unlawfully detaining Deirdre. She admitted her role in it all, and at the sentencing hearing, her lawyer begged for leniency, saying Chris's hold over her was like a child abuser's over their victim. The judge gave her a 2-year sentence and suspended the last 6 months and ordered psychiatric treatment for her while she was inside. He didn't hold back on what he said to her about Deirdre. She was robbed of her childhood, he said. 2 years without school, without friends, without her mother's love and guidance. Outside the courtroom, Christine's voice was steady but heavy. No sentence can bring Deirdre back. You can't put a price on her life. What Chris did was unforgivable, horrific. He destroyed her, then kept destroying me. But Regina, she was an adult. She had chances to do the right thing, and every time she chose not to. Now she's got to live with that. Christine is calling out to anyone else who might have known anything. Chris was sick, but there were people out there living normal lives who had information that could have helped. This never should have happened to Deirdre. She was just a little girl. It does leave you wondering who else knew and why they didn't speak up. Christine then reflected as she spoke about the man she once lived with, loved and had Deirdre with. A man who looked into her little girl's beautiful blue eyes and pulled a trigger. What was he really like, she said. It's like he was someone else. We didn't know him. He was so disturbed, emotionally broken, obsessed with control. I'd never have thought he could have done this. He'd get mood swings, act paranoid sometimes. If only he'd been diagnosed manic depressive, schizophrenic, maybe this wouldn't have happened. So before I finish this particularly sad episode, let's take a moment to reflect on Deirdre Crowley and her mother, Christine O'Sullivan. Deirdre was just a little girl, 4 years old when she was snatched from her mother. sparkling blue eyes and a smile, as her mother said, that could light up a room. She deserved a childhood filled with laughter, school days, and her mother's warm hugs. But instead she spent her last 21 months hidden away, a prisoner in a damp, dark cottage, her tiny shoes cut open to fit her growing feet. It's really a heartbreaking image. And then there's Christine. Her strength is nothing short of incredible. Through every agonising day, she fought for Deirdre, chasing leads across the UK, pouring her heart out on airwaves, never letting hope die, even as the months stretched on. Her faith, her love carried her through a nightmare no parent should ever have to endure. Even after losing Deirdre, she stood tall at that funeral, trusting she'd see her little girl again. Their story leaves us with a heavy truth. Some evils hide close to home, but love, like Christine's, that shines even in the darkest moments. So guys, that's it for today's episode of the Ireland Crimes and Mysteries podcast. Again, thanks for your listenership, and don't forget to subscribe to the show and hit that auto download so you never miss an episode. Until the next time, keep your eyes open and your mind curious. This podcast has been compiled from information gathered in the public sphere, like news articles, documentaries, and open source material that can be found on the web. Everything in this podcast is alleged unless a conviction has taken place.
You've been listening to Ireland Crimes and Mysteries. Join Nules for another episode, coming real soon. And keep up to date by following our social media sites, our YouTube channel, and our website, irelandcrimesandmysteries.ie.